Mark Levine, and I'm here today to talk with you about February of 2018. Normally, I record these monthly videos in front of a live audience at Soul Food Coffee House in Redmond, Washington on the last Wednesday night of every month. But I'm heading off to India tomorrow to Kolkata to speak at an astrology conference there. And so I am recording this from the lovely confines of my own living room. It's a bit weird because I'm so used to talking with a live audience, but we'll get through the material and hopefully you'll get a sense of what's up for the month of February of 2018. Now, before I jump in, I always like to spend a few minutes talking about my upcoming events. Most of you appreciate this. I do get some flack from some people who complain that it's 5 or 10 minutes in before the talk starts, and I can't apologize for that. In fact, stop complaining about it. It's my YouTube channel. You're getting this content for free. If you don't want to hear about my upcoming events, scroll past it and look for the beginning of when I start talking about the astrology. But don't complain that that someone's making you watch this part. It won't be long. There's only a few things to talk about today. First of all, obviously, I'll be speaking at the 28th International Astrological Conference, which will be from January 30th to February 4th, and that'll be in Kolkata, India. And for those of you on that side of the world, see you there. March 22nd through March 26th, NORWAC, the Northwest Astrology Conference. And this is my favorite of all the conferences. I think this is my 28th or 29th year that I've attended. I think I missed one somewhere in there. I was out of the country 1 year. But I will be speaking there. There are lecturers from, again, all over the world. It's a wonderful weekend. You can come for a pre-conference, post-conference, one day, or the entire string of it. It's in Seattle. More information can be found at norwac.net, norwac.net. That's March 22nd through the 26th. Then, the grandmother of all astrology conferences in the Western world, UAC, the United Astrological Conference, is in Chicago, Illinois this year. This is a once every 4 or 5 year conference, and so it's certainly something that if you're an aspiring astrologer, an astrology student, or a professional and just somehow have missed the fact that these congresses or conferences happen every 4 or 5 years, it is going to probably be somewhere between, I don't know, 1,500, 2,000 astrologers there. I think there are 140 speakers from all over the world. And it's an amazing event, and you can find more by following this link. UAC, the United Astrological Conference. Then on July 29th through August 2nd, I will be leading my Brighton Bush Summer Retreat, which is called Putting Astrology to Work in Your Life. And this is for beginners, intermediates, advanced professionals. There's some experiential work. We work with the individual charts of the people who are attending. Brighton Bush is a magnificent place. I've been doing teaching workshops there for a dozen years now. Just finished doing my year ahead that I do the first week in January every year to a group of 28 amazing participants. Thank you for any of you who happen to be watching this. You were great. It was a fun weekend, and we went through a lot of material. If you're interested in Brighton Bush, it's an amazing place. It's a couple of hours outside of Portland, Oregon, up in the hills of Central Oregon. Old growth forest, very magical, hot springs, beautiful, beautiful retreat facility, and it does sell out. So if you're interested, consider getting your name into the list sooner than later, because the enrollment there is limited and these events do sell out. And then the culmination. I will be back in Bali, back to Bali, October 6th through October 14th. This is my 5th or 6th, I think it's my 5th week-long, 8-day retreat, astrological retreat in Bali. This year, the topic is Think Cosmically, Act Locally. And again, we'll be talking about, it's one thing to think about cosmic things and reach for the stars, reach for the planets, grow our minds and try to expand outwards. This is the opposite. This is, how do we pull that energy down and into our lives, into our bodies? How do we utilize Jupiter or Mars or Venus? How do we conjure them up? We'll be doing some ritual, we'll be doing some astro drama, we'll be doing experiential stuff, and we will also be working with the charts of the participants. This too is a small group conference. Attendance is limited. If you're interested, follow the link. It's to Heaven and Earth Workshops, Heaven and Earth Workshops, one word.com, or you can go to stariq.com/Bali, stariq.com/Bali, and that will take you to the same place, and it'll get more information about this conference. It's an amazing every one of these is better than the one that I did the year before, and it's not just because I become more familiar with the material and with the work and with Bali itself, but the people who attend it make the difference. It's a magical time. I invite you to join us, and that's it. Now into February 2018, and boy, oh boy, oh boy, what a month it is. So every month has its own unique kind of flavor to it, and I do my best to at least get a sense of what the lay of the land is for the month ahead. I don't necessarily talk about every single aspect every day. There are astrologers who do that, and I encourage you to follow up on those YouTube videos. There are many out there. What I try to do is to take a macro approach to the month and talk about what is February really all about. And with February, it's interesting because there's no major outer planet activity, meaning that there's no aspects between Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. The aspects are all from the faster moving inner planets, Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, to the outer planets, which gives it a different flavor. It doesn't make things less important, but it makes things more. It's the difference between acute and chronic. In health, a chronic illness is one that lasts a long time. It builds up and it happens over years. Something that's acute flares up, and acute can be more intense than chronic, but it's more of the moment. It comes and goes. And this month is one of those months that is very strong on the side of acute energy. And yet the chronic stuff is there. It doesn't ever go away, but it's not the stuff that's driving the month. We are coming out of a density of planets going back to the last new moon in Capricorn, where there were 6 planets stuffed into Capricorn. And now as we get to the beginning of February, we actually have Mercury and Venus and the Sun, all of which have moved from Capricorn into Aquarius. And so we have this Aquarian energy. Granted, heavy Saturn, 2.5 years in Capricorn, Pluto in there for the long haul. It's only halfway through its decade and a half long stay there. But these 3 planets, Mercury, Venus, and the Sun, in Aquarius, all change signs this month, and they all move into Pisces. and one by one they will all line up with Neptune. This is the basic underlying theme of February. It's the transformation of energy from Aquarius into Pisces. And we will also look at the modern ruling or associating planets to Aquarius and Pisces to get a flavor of what this will mean for us this month. In traditional astrology, Saturn having moved into Capricorn, Saturn came home. Saturn's back home in Capricorn. So Saturn in ancient astrology is the ruling planet of Capricorn, but in ancient astrology, it's also the ruling planet of Aquarius. In modern astrology, we've given Uranus to Aquarius, and Uranus is electric, it's sudden, it has to do with topsy-turvy, revolutionary, rebellious, genius, ingenuity. Uranus is the other than normal planet, and it's shock. And we'll come back to that in a bit, because with all these planets in Aquarius, Uranus becomes just an automatic key player, whether or not it's being aspected. But one by one, these planets in Aquarius will move into Pisces. And in fact, the way that they do that is that Venus is the first planet to move into Pisces on February 10th, followed by Mercury on the 17th. Mercury catches up to the sun and goes first, and then followed the next day on the 18th by the sun. What that means is by the end of the month, we'll have Chiron and Neptune, both long-haul stays, Neptune in Pisces for 14 years, and Chiron actually changing signs this year into Aries, but Chiron spends a few years in each sign. So by the end of the month, we will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 planets in Pisces. And I just want to run through this very quickly so you can see what this looks like when I animate this. So we're going to keep our eyes on Mercury, the Sun, and Venus in particular, and watch them change signs, because the other planets, Jupiter, does not change signs. It stays in Scorpio. Mars stays in Sagittarius, and Saturn stays in Capricorn. So we're just going to watch Mercury, Venus, and the Sun, and we're going to move this one day at a time. One day at a time. And here we are on February 1st. Here we are on the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th. Watch Venus. Venus is getting ready to change signs right there. Venus changed signs on the 10th into Pisces. And we keep going, and the moon comes around. The moon moves a sign every 2.5 days. And so by the 15th, by the 13th, the moon is in Aquarius, and by the 15th, the moon is new, meaning the sun and the moon are lined up in the same place in the sky. This new moon on February 15th is actually a new moon eclipse. It's a solar eclipse in Aquarius. We'll get to that in a moment. It's architectural to the month. It has to do with a lot of what's going on this month. But that new moon in Aquarius. But by the time we get to the 16th, the moon moves into Pisces. By the 17th, Venus, and by the 18th, Mercury. Moon's off into Aries. But you can see now we have we have 5 planets in Pisces. And this is actually what the month is about. We can take it all the way through the end of the month, but those planets stay in Pisces for the rest of the month, and then begin moving one at a time into Aries as we get into March. So let's come back to the beginning of February. Zoom. That was like everything in retrograde. Okay, so because we have this flow from Aquarius to Pisces, I want to talk a little bit about both of those signs, and I want to talk a little bit about the planets that are connected with those signs, so we can really get a feel for what we're facing this month. I would say that if I had one thing to say about the month, it would be Neptune. And now that's odd because there's no major significant aspects to Neptune. Well, there are a couple, but they're not huge aspects. And yet the month is really Neptune's month, and we'll get to that in just a moment. What I want to do, though, to start off is I want to talk a little bit about the sign of Aquarius and Pisces, because Aquarius is arguably the weirdest sign of the zodiac. I said that last month, and I got a lot of people commenting on YouTube saying, oh yeah, it's weird, and it is weird. But here's a couple of things that make Uranus weird. First of all, these look like waves. The sign of Uranus makes it look like waves, except it's not a water sign. Uranus is the water bearer. It brings water, but it's not a water sign. It's an air sign. Water in astrology is emotional. Air signs are intellectual. Aquarius is a mental, intellectual, thoughtful sign. So why is it the water bearer? Well, here's the deal. Air has moisture or water in it. In fact, when we listen to the weather report, one of the things we learn is what's the temperature. And another thing we learn is what's the humidity. And then the third thing we learn is what's the pressure. These three things, there are other things, but these things are important to understand the weather. So as the humidity goes up, there's more and more water in the air. And how we act and react with water in the air is very different than how we act and react when the air is dry. Anyone who has lived in landlocked northern hemispheric or extreme latitude regions in the winter knows that when the water locks up and the air becomes dry. I lived in Minneapolis for about a dozen years, and in the winter time, if you shake someone's hand, if you pick up your child, if you touch someone, if you pick up something off the table, if you touch a light socket, everything makes a spark. It's a spark. It's electricity, because the air is so dry that the electricity doesn't flow. Now compare that with life in on a tropical island, equatorial, and it's hot and humid, and there's lots of moisture in the air, and it's almost impossible to get a spark ever. Why? Because the energy just flows naturally. And this is a difference in the lifestyle, the way the brain functions in cold, dry versus warm, wet. It's interesting because there's more psychic energy, there's more emotional flowing of energy, even in the northern hemisphere when it gets warm and wet in the summer in many places. But the idea of the very extreme latitudes, the Nordic countries, the Brits, Canada, far north in Russia, when you get to those northern areas, there's less water, or the water is locked up. And so there's less emotional flowing. There's more kind of, it's more intellectual, it's more fire air than earth water. The thing, though, to understand about the air sign Aquarius is that without the water in the air, electricity doesn't flow. Now, in astrology, every sign relates to a part of the body, and every part of the body is related to either a planet or a sign. And it turns out that Aquarius is how electricity is distributed throughout the body. We call this our nervous system. And normally, when you have an electrical impulse going down a nerve, it travels along that nerve as an electrical impulse, and there are positive charges and then there are negative charges, and this is called the ionic transference, where the impulse moves along where the positive and negatives interact. However, and this is the key point here, without water, there can be no flow of electricity in the nerves because it's the water that creates the conduction of the electricity. All right. Now, when we look at planets relating to signs, in ancient astrology, Saturn was like, it was the ruler of not only Capricorn, but of Aquarius. And in a way, the Aquarius side of Saturn was that once you know the rules, the laws, that's Saturn, that's Capricorn, the authority. But a scientist who knows those rules and laws can invent new things, can break out of those laws by combining things together in a way of knowledge, of knowing how those laws work and where their limits are. In modern astrology, we've taken Uranus as the planet that is connected with Aquarius. And here it's key to understand that Uranus's action is electrical. Just like Aquarius, it's the electromagnetic vibrations that are in the air. It's the water in the air, if you will. And Uranus is about lightning. Lightning strikes suddenly to release built-up tension. I think I said last month as the sun was moving into Aquarius, and we talked a little bit about Uranus, that Uranus's job is the instantaneous resolution of irresolvable opposites, the instantaneous resolution of irresolvable opposites. When you have positive and negative ions that can't work it out, all of a sudden what happens is the lightning strikes. And that kind of it resolves the built-up tension. And Uranus works that way in our charts natally or by transit. Its action is sudden. It's Uranus, the awakener, the great awakener. It's the wake-up call. It's the lights going on. It's enlightenment. It's ingenuity. It's the light bulb going on and going, I got it. The aha experience. It's also the lightning striking and burning down an entire state, or Yellowstone Park as it did a couple of decades ago. And it was considered to be the greatest disaster in any national park ever in the United States. But some 20 years later, naturalists agree. They tell us that Yellowstone is healthier than it's ever been. More flora, more fauna. It's revitalized. So it's when Uranus strikes, when lightning strikes and takes something away, even though it may be us, it may be something that we love, something that's near and dear. It does it in a way to clear the air or to clear the undergrowth so that things can grow back in a healthier manner. So that's a bit of Uranus, and we're kind of coming out of a Uranian period with all these planets clustered in Aquarius and coming up to an eclipse, a new moon eclipse in Aquarius that's conjunct or lined up with Mercury. And Mercury can also be, I don't want to say Mercury and Uranus have a special connection. In fact, there is a whole concept in astrology called planetary octaves. And Uranus is the higher octave of Mercury. Neptune is the higher octave of Venus. Pluto is the higher octave of Mars. But the Uranus-Mercury connection is very significant because Mercury is our thoughts. It's how we think. And yet Uranus is the nervous system and the functioning of the electricity in the brain. That's basically how those thoughts are distributed. So the connection between Mercury and Uranus is significant, and the solar eclipse on February 15th, the eclipse in Uranian Aquarius, is lined up with Mercury. We'll get there in a minute. All right, now we have this movement of everything from Aquarius, not everything, but several planets, the Sun, Mercury, and Venus, from Aquarius into Pisces. Now, Pisces, like Aquarius, has two sides to it. Aquarius has the movement of the waves, but Aquarius is a fixed sign. Pisces is a changeable sign. It's a mutable sign. And these two curves actually represent the opposite forces in nature. You can call them yin and yang. You can call them up and down, in and out, male and female, good and evil, evolution and de-evolution or involution. You can call them whatever you want. But the symbol of Pisces is actually, nope, I almost did that right, is actually the fish swimming in opposite directions. That's what the symbol represents. It's the multiplicity of reality, the multiplicity of the fish. It's the dividing of the loaves, if you will. And Pisces, Christianity being the religion of the age of Pisces, it's about multiplicity. But it's also about the fact that these opposite forces, good and evil, heaven and earth, are not connected. But there's this magical golden thread that connects these two opposite forces. And this is the mystical connection that is reserved for initiates of the church, the priesthood. In fact, in the age of Pisces, common people had to go to a priest in order to get God. Whether it was God's punishment or approval, whether it was a confession with an atonement or in some way a forgiveness that was given, all of these things had to do with the priest as intermediary, because it was this line that connected these opposite forces in Pisces, that connects these opposite forces that are not obviously connected. So we have the movement of planets from Aquarius to Pisces. Pisces is a water sign. It's not just the water bearer. Now we're in the water. The fish are in the water. If you've ever done any scuba diving or any diving of any sort, if you've spent any time in any large schools of fish, you understand. It's like watching also sometimes these large flocks of birds. They think as one. A school of fish is not about any one single isolated fish. It's about all of them that move together. And there's this sense of lack of individuality, of a kind of a connection with it all. Now, we get some of that in Aquarius in an intellectual level, where Aquarius is kind of this kind of connection with the larger group. But there's also in Aquarius this egocentricity, this idiosyncrasies that we hold on to, the nonconformity. I want to be a part of the group, but I'm also outside the group. In Pisces, it's a merge. I lose the boundary between me and you, between self and other, or self and others. And that is a function of the planet that is in charge of Pisces, the modern planet, which is Neptune. Now, remember, in ancient astrology, Jupiter did double duty. Jupiter was the planet that ruled Sagittarius and Pisces, and Jupiter and Neptune have something very important that are in common, and that is they're both expansive. Except Jupiter can only expand to the point it reaches Saturn. So in other words, the difference between Jupiter and Neptune is Saturn. Because if you blow up a balloon, that's Jupiter, and it can only get so far until it reaches its limit. And if you blow it up farther than that, pop, it's hit its boundary, it's hit its limit, Saturn. But Neptune, in fact, has escaped, and Neptune can disperse forever. And that's Neptune's strength, is that Neptune becomes ubiquitous. Neptune is the spirit that is in everything. There are basically three Neptunian substances. There are more, but three main ones. The first one that I want to talk about is the ocean. Because let's say you have a crystal of salt, or a tablespoon of salt, or a bucket of salt. Salt is Saturnine. It's crystallized. It's contracted. In fact, the action of salt is to contract, is to draw out or draw in. And salt is a very Saturnine material. But when you pour water into salt, it melts. the structure disappears. Like Neptune, it becomes diffused in the water. And so the ocean are the salts, not just the table salt, but ocean consists of all the various dissolvable minerals that dissolve into the ocean. So the ocean is the great dissolver. Everything crystallizes from the ocean and eventually washes back into it. And it's not just the big ocean, the Pacific Ocean, or the oceans of Earth. It's the ocean of consciousness, the seas of consciousness, the seas of awareness. This is what Neptune and Pisces represents. It's swimming in those oceans. And in fact, the metaphor of the fish in the ocean is like we are fish in the ocean, and there's really no difference between you and me and him and her and them, and it doesn't matter. All those differences are illusions based upon the ego's need to have separateness. And what the lesson of Pisces and Neptune is that separateness is the great illusion. This has come down to us through all the mystical traditions, certainly through the Buddhist and Hindu tradition in particular, that illusion of separateness. In fact, namaste is the concept that in me, beyond all my noise, there's a place of silence. That's the exact same place as the place of silence within you, or within him, or within her, or within them. So Neptune has to do with the dissolution of boundaries. The second Neptunian substance that I want to talk about is alcohol. Now, alcohol is considered to be the universal solvent by chemists, because if something won't dissolve in water, chances are it'll dissolve in alcohol. It's why we use alcohol as a cleaner, because alcohol melts away, like water melts away salt. Alcohol melts away the edges of the dirt. It dissolves it. So alcohol breaks down the hard edges of Saturn and makes them disappear. When we drink it, it does the same damn thing. It makes that hard edge of a stop sign say, slow down. Maybe. In other words, it makes the rules or the laws or the speed limits, it makes those Saturnian boundaries be less edgy, more permeable, if you will, less real, if you will. Whether we use it in the lab or whether we drink it, alcohol has the same function. And in fact, as a religious sacrament, wine, often even just a little bit of it, has a sense of putting us in a frame of mind where we can move from the physical to the metaphysical, or from the physical into the spiritual. And what's alcohol is called spirits. And what's something without a body? A spirit. And in fact, this is what Pisces Neptune is all about. It's about consciousness that's dissolved into the greater whole and doesn't necessarily have material substance. That's the magic of Pisces. The third substance I want to talk about is oil. And this is an interesting one, because when we think of oil coming up out of the ground and being turned to gasoline so that we can power our cars and whatever. But the fact of the matter is that oil is also, as a Neptunian substance, it's used to make the hard edges of Saturn go away. You see, in every internal combustion engine, there are cylinders with pistons that when the gas is burned and it goes pop, it pushes the piston up, and the up and down motion of the pistons is actually then translated into power along a power train. The thing is, though, without oil in the cylinder, the steel of the piston would seize up and lock against the steel of the cylinder. But you put the oil in it and the oil goes, ain't no Saturn here. There aren't any hard edges. Those hard edges have been melted away. Those surfaces have been melted away and disappeared. And that's how oil is also a Neptunian substance. Incidentally, oils and alcohol are diffusive in a way that they create aromas. And aromatherapy goes right to the old reptile back brain, and is the most powerful, smelling is the most powerful sense to conjure up memories, images, etc. And again, this is all the power of Neptune, Neptune being related to imagination, dreams, spirituality, again, the non-physical dimensions. One last thing about Neptune, and then we'll get back to charts, is that often when we lose our perspective, we use the word confusion. What's going on? I don't know. I'm confused. I can't figure it out. When we're confused, we don't know where we are. We don't know what direction we're going in. We don't know what's real and what's fake news. We can't figure it out. Confusion is not necessarily a good place to be, or is it? You see, because when we look at what the word really means, it comes from two words, and it's con and fusion. And con means with. It's together, like a conjunction is two things coming together, joining. A conspiracy is a group of people that are aspiring, breathing, con together. If you're breathing together, you're conspiracists. The word confusion really means with fusion. So the question is, what does fusion mean? And fusion is when two things blend together. So confusion is actually what happens when I lose my when I lose my objectivity. When the ego can't tell what's me and what's you. When the boundaries between me and everyone else disintegrate or disappear or fade, whether I'm in some sort of meditative state, spiritual enlightenment, whether I'm ecstatically dancing, or whether I've had too much alcohol, those boundaries are gone and I can be confused. It's the ego that is confused because the ego's job is to maintain survival, and it does that by creating boundaries between the illusion of me being something separate from everything else. All right. Now, let's go back to charts. Because what we have this month is a movement from the knowing of the intellectual, kind of lightning striking ingenuity, conceptual framework of Aquarius, where everything fits in with everything. You know, Aquarians are know-it-alls. And a lot of them it's arguably the intellectually smartest sign, because Aquarians tend to be able to see the big patterns and put things into place in those patterns. Whereas Pisces is watery, it's emotional, it's intuitive, it's softer. It certainly can be confused or confusing, but there's the sense of compassion. If I'm compassionate, then I am feeling, there's an empathy, I am feeling someone else's stuff as if it's mine. I'm not sympathizing, I'm not putting my vibration in a place that's similar to theirs so I can see what they're doing or feeling. No, I'm actually feeling it. And so Pisces is very much an all-engulfing, but it can be confusing energy. So let's step through the month with this in mind, because this whole month is a movement from knowing to intuiting. We need to become more facile, trusting our instincts and our intuition and our emotions rather than just being in our head. Right now we know it. We know what's true. We begin the month with Mercury, the Sun, and the South Node kind of saying that all of this is familiar. We know this Aquarian energy. We've been here before. And Venus, all in Aquarius. We have Jupiter still in Scorpio. It'll be there all year. Of course, the scandals about abuse of power by white males mostly, maybe all, but, well, no, not all, but certainly mostly. The abuse of power, sexual, the intimacy that's coming out into the open, or the confusion of sexuality with intimacy, may be a better way to state it. And I've been saying for a couple of months, this originally came from my editor, who said that Jupiter isn't about an event. Jupiter is always a journey. We're on this year-long journey of Jupiter moving through Scorpio, and most recently under some very powerful Jupiter aspects back toward the end of January, or back a week ago or so. We've had the conviction of the Olympic gymnast Dr. Nasser, who was sentenced to 40 to 175 years. There's a lot more energy that will fall around this latest unveiling or revelation of abuse of power. And it's not just about him, although what he did was horrific. There are people, again, that support and are part of this. This is a systemic cultural thing that is right now coming out more and more into the open, and Jupiter is part of it, and we will see more of that this month as Venus and the Sun and Mercury take turns squaring Jupiter. Venus is the first to square Jupiter on February 3rd. Then the Sun moves into that 21st degree, 22 degree, 21, 22. It squares Jupiter on the 10th, and then Mercury right behind it on the 13th. So we will see more and more of this energy coming out. Excess, indulgence. It may come out in government spending, in personal spending, in just the becoming aware of where we push boundaries too much or too far that are not necessarily healthy. Now, in fact, on February 3rd, Venus is square to Jupiter. Venus and Jupiter traditionally are the benefics. They are the good planets. But we moderners know that the good planets, the benefics, Venus and Jupiter, or the bad planets, the malefics, that would be Mars and Saturn, are not really good or bad. They're just easier or harder to work with. I mean, it's certainly more fun having the indulgence of Venus and Jupiter than it is having the restriction or the frustration of Mars, Saturn. So we start the month with this Venus making a square to Jupiter, but only a couple of days later, that square, there it is right there on the 3rd, Venus at 21 degrees squared Jupiter at 21 degrees. And then a couple days later, that Venus makes a sextile. You can see it forming right here. It's exact on February 6th. Venus makes a sextile with Uranus. And here we get to move that energy. Here it's a little bit more exciting. Sextiles are cooperative, and these sextiles will come into importance throughout the month, because Venus, the Sun, and Mercury will one at a time this month each square Jupiter. We've already talked about that, indulgence too much, and they will each sextile Uranus. And as they sextile Uranus, first Venus on February 6th, then the Sun on February 13th, and then Mercury on February 15th. Each of these will be kind of like an ability to move with the energy through knowing. Again, it's Uranus. Remember, we're going Neptune, Uranus this month. And so this is kind of these planets beginning on the 6th will make sextiles with Uranus that kind of allow us to have the information that we need to make the decisions that we need to make. On February 10th, the first of the three planets changes signs from Aquarius. We're looking here at Venus right here. Venus at 28 degrees on the 9th, and then on the 10th it's at late 29, and by the 11th Venus has moved into Pisces. So Venus moves into Pisces, that begins the exodus. Venus will be followed by the Sun and Mercury, but as Venus moves into Pisces on the 10th, we're going to get a first glimpse of maybe getting out of our heads and into our hearts, having compassion. Maybe some of this will be the compassion for people like the dreamers, or like people who have been marginalized, whether it's because of race, of nationality, of sexual orientation, gender, all these biases in Aquarius, which is really about groups of people, but being isolated in groups, or that whole sense of what I called earlier, the on the edge, the idiosyncratic side of what makes me different. And yet in Pisces we lose that, and we become more merged with this greater field. And so it's that sense of compassion that begins, or at least is amped up, when Venus moves into Pisces on February 10th. And again, that's followed by Mercury on the 17th and the Sun on the 18th. We'll get to there in just a moment. So these planets, one at a time, are going to square Jupiter and then sextile Uranus. And so then we have the Sun squaring Jupiter on the 10th right in there also. Now the Sun and Jupiter are the two largest things in the solar system. When they create aspects, it's like huge, because they are the weightiest, massiest, is that a word, massiest? They have the greatest mass together. They're like 99%. I just made that number up. I don't know what it is. Someone can look it up and post it as a comment on YouTube. But the Sun square to Jupiter, again, is in second round of indulgences, overdoing, coming out. It can be pleasurable, but it also can be dangerous. It's like deciding you're going to do a bathroom remodel, and you go with your partner or your spouse or your friend, and you go to the contractor, and you think that it's going to cost like $4,000 to put in a new bathtub and sink fixtures and whatever. And by the time you're done, you've realized that while you're doing that, you might as well put in a new tile. And as long as you're getting tiles, you might as well do this whole thing in ceramic. And as long as you're doing that, you got to do some new plumbing. And so you might as well put in a sauna at the same time, which means breaking out a wall and then maybe putting a deck on that. And by the time you're done, your $3,000 or $4,000 job has become $40,000. And that's how Jupiter and the Sun square working. It inflates. It gets more and more and more. So by the 12th, we have a half square between Mercury and Saturn, and that won't show up here, but that will help us keep things in check a little bit, I think, so we can pull stuff back a little bit on the 12th, although there'll be a little crazy energy working around there. By the 13th, Mercury comes into a square with Jupiter. First it was the Sun, and now behind it it's Mercury, but now the Sun is sextiling Uranus, and that'll be followed by Mercury. There's this kind of play between the expansion first in Jupiter and then the kind of erratic awakening as the energies hit Uranus. On the 13th, the Sun sextiles Uranus. By the 15th, we have Mercury catching up to the Sun, and catching up to, it's still a degree away, but here we have, and I'm going to change this time here, because I want this exact so you can see this. Well, that's 1:05 is what I'm looking for here. There we go. So at 1:05 p.m., and that's Pacific time, or is that? Yeah, that's Pacific time. We have the Sun and the Moon at the same degree, same minute. Actually, here it shows 1 minute apart. And this new moon at 27 degrees of Aquarius at 1:06 p.m. Pacific time is a solar eclipse. This solar eclipse is particularly powerful for a number of reasons, a couple obvious and a couple not so obvious. The obvious reason is that this eclipse is conjunct, let me change the color here. The obvious reason is that this eclipse is conjunct Mercury. That Mercury is an important player in this eclipse. The moon lines up with Mercury just hours before the eclipse, and then Mercury actually catches up to the sun on the 17th early in the morning, so like a day and a half after the eclipse. But communication here is an important part of this eclipse. And remember earlier I said that Mercury and Uranus had a special affinity, that Uranus was the higher octave of Mercury. Well, here this eclipse is in Uranus's sign Aquarius, and Mercury is involved in it. And not only that, it is sextile. We're back to that sextile again. It is sextile to Uranus. That is very, very close here. And in fact, the exact sextile is just a few hours prior to the eclipse. But it really buzzes of that energy because Mercury is there too. And it basically gives us a aha. It's like the lights go off and the lights go on. That's what happens in a solar eclipse. The sun is bright, then the moon darkens the sun, and then they come back on again. It's like a polarization. It's like a blip, blip, blip. And I think that this eclipse will wake us up on some level, whether it's personally, emotionally, spiritually, politically, that there's something here that happens that brings things out into the light. And because it's sextile to Uranus, I think the suddenness and the surprising way in which this unfolds will be very important. Now, understand that eclipses don't always spill all their energy on the day of the eclipse. The energy builds up, and it can take weeks, sometimes even months, for the eclipse's energy to fully culminate. But that's not the only important thing about this eclipse. The other piece here that is very significant is that we have Mars in Sagittarius. Remember, Mars was in Scorpio, and Mars is powerful in Scorpio, but it's kind of working undercover. There's this kind of like deep, intense, transformational thing that's happening, like the caterpillar changing into the butterfly, but it's in the dark. We can't see it. And then Mars goes into Sagittarius, and the butterfly emerges, but it's not a butterfly. It's an albatross, and it's going to fly for thousands of miles. You see, because Mars in Sagittarius wants to go far. All right. So we have Mars in Sagittarius all month, but on the 15th, on the day of the eclipse, it's actually exact on the 17th, but it's already very closely within orb during the eclipse, that Mars forms a square with Neptune. Okay, now remember we talked about Uranus, Neptune. Uranus is I know everything. Neptune is I don't know anything. I can kind of intuitively feel that this is the way it is. This is the vibe I'm getting. But when Mars squares Neptune, Mars is physical energy. It's going somewhere. It's doing something, but it reaches Neptune and it's like the wind stopped blowing. It doesn't know where it's going. The GPS stops working. It doesn't know where it is. It doesn't know how it's going to get anywhere because it's just kind of wandering. And I think of Tolkien's famous line, all who wander are not lost. And that might have some import here as Mars squares Neptune and we wander a bit. This same period of time, though, has, let's get out of here. This same period of time, though, by the 17th, we're going a minute at a time. There we go. This same period of time by the 17th has the Sun and Mercury together. So Mercury's caught up with the Sun. It's a Mercury-Sun conjunction, and that energy was around during the eclipse, but now Mercury is lined up exactly with the Sun, and it actually passes through the heart of the Sun. That's a cazimi, that's powerful, forceful. But this is Mercury on the far side of the Sun. It's when Mercury is retrograde conjunct the Sun, it's between the Earth and the Sun. On the far side of the Sun, the communication gets out, except Mercury is invisible. We can't see it. It's behind the glare of the Sun. But on the 17th, that whole period of time, again, more information coming out, but the square between Mars and Neptune makes it hard to tell what's real. And then on the 17th, between the 17th and the 18th, the Sun and Mercury move from Aquarius into Pisces. And now all of a sudden we have 5 planets in Pisces, including Neptune, that's there halfway through its 14-year run through Pisces, and Chiron, which actually changes signs next year. It moves into Aries, but Chiron has been in Pisces for a while, and each one of these planets, Venus, Mercury, and the Sun, will come and join up with Neptune, fuzzing things out even more, making things more nebulous, more ephemeral, more metaphysical, more spiritual, more confusing, one at a time. And they do that on Venus does it on February 21st, just a few days later, and then Mercury behind it on the 25th, and then the Sun doesn't come through that point until the first week in March. We'll talk more about that next month. But the point is that then all of these same planets in March will one by one line up with Chiron, and Chiron as the wounded healer. We'll talk more about that next month, because the fact that Chiron is in this picture and the healing that needs to occur once we have the intellectual mental breakthrough and we see what's true, and then we begin to be confused by what is real, it needs to be healing on the far end. And that comes, I think, in March, when these planets one by one line up with Chiron. So we're on the 18th, and the Sun moves into Pisces along with Mercury, and now we've lost this whole sense of the intellectual. It's like Uranus has become less powerful almost immediately, and Neptune gains in power because all these planets now are in Neptune's sign, and they're all heading towards personal individual meetings with Neptune over the next few weeks. And again, I think we already said that the Venus meets up with Neptune on the 21st and Mercury meets up with Neptune on the 25th. These are days of great potential for spiritual awakening and awareness, but they're also days in which we can be a bit confused. I always say that when Mercury and Venus are connected with Neptune, it's better to be romantic and write poetry. It's better to spend time meditating, doing yoga and dreaming. It's better to go to a movie if you can than it is to try to write your yearly report or to do your taxes. This is a day when focusing on the intellectual is difficult, because the mind is more into the ethereal and into the magical. Okay, so here on the 20th, 21st, Venus, which we can see here coming up to Neptune, and then Mercury behind it. But on the 21st, there's Venus catching up with Neptune, and then on the 24th, 25th, the 25th is when Mercury catches up with Neptune. And again, the spirituality here is really important. We need to go out of our way to give ourselves permission and space to dream, but to also not mistake the dreams for reality. There's a difference. They both give us good things. During this same period of time, we also have first Venus and then Mercury making sextiles with Saturn. Now this goes back to the eclipse day on the 15th, we have Venus at 6 degrees of Pisces, making a sextile with Saturn. Into the craziness of all of that energy, we get a bit of reality, a bit of grounding. We know what we want, and we can use that to fix our energy. You know, when dancers are doing turnings, fast turnings is a word for it, fast turnings. What they do is they keep their eyes focused on something so that every turn they come back, which helps them keep their equilibrium. If you're a diver and you're out on a dive ship or even just on a passenger ship and it's rough water and you begin to get seasick, basically what helps is looking out at the horizon and finding something steady. And I think that this Venus sextile to Saturn on the 15th, we need to remember that we want something steady, and that if we can find it, that'll help, you know, keep our equilibrium while everything else is spinning a bit. But then by the 21st, we have Mercury moving into that same position, where Mercury is now sextiling Saturn, also giving us a bit of intellectual reality check. Mercury is in Pisces, so we're kind of still a bit intuitive, but because of its sextile with Saturn, we can discern what's true if we pay attention. And then behind that comes the Sun, making its sextile with Saturn on the 25th. And again, so what this means is that even though we're fuzzing out and we're becoming more dreamy, we're becoming more confused, what the hell's going on? We've lost touch with what it is that's going on, where we are, where we're heading, and yet in all of this, there are points of solidity if we seek them out that help us keep it together. One last piece as we get closer to the end of the month, both Mercury and Venus form sextiles with Pluto and squares with Mars. The Venus square to Mars begins here on the 25th. You can see Venus square Mars on the 25th, and then it'll be followed by Mercury squaring Mars on the 28th. At the same time, we have Venus forming a sextile with Pluto, Venus to Pluto. That will the line is buried there, but you'll see it more in a minute. Venus sextiles Pluto on the 27th, and Mercury sextiles Pluto on the 28th. Let's just run to these so you can see. So here on the 27th, now you can see that the Venus sextile Pluto, and that's followed by the Mercury square Mars, and then the Mercury sextile Pluto. What does all this mean? Well, Venus and Mercury are coming together. They actually join up in the beginning of March. And what happens is that, actually here we are at the beginning of March already, is that Mercury is how we think and Venus is what we want, it's what we like. And in some ways, those two planets are coming into trines with Jupiter, squares with Mars, and sextiles with Pluto. And in a short nutshell, what this really means is that the Pluto aspects will intensify things and deepen them, will go into the hidden and the unconscious and bring things out, and yet the squares to Mars can be a bit fiery. We may see some political fireworks going on, as if we haven't had any already. But we may see this kind of reach another level where there's really like words being spoken or actual, maybe even real aggression that we may have to deal with, that we've been dancing around. But this, I think, all builds towards the end of the month as Mercury and Venus square Mars. There's an upside to it too. This can be sporting and playful, and in an intimate setting, Mercury and Venus together square to Mars can be very playful and very erotic even, although Mars in Sagittarius is more about doing things. The fact that Venus and Mercury are both in Pisces, there is more of an intuitive, intimate, I think, piece to that. But where all of these are going and where the month ends is on a ray of hope. Because what happens is that these planets, first Mercury, then Venus, and then a few weeks later the Sun, will one at a time each trine Jupiter. Now remember, they squared Jupiter at the beginning of the month, and that was too much. No boundaries, overindulgence, more than you can handle. And now as they trine Jupiter, this is good news. This is, if you've done the work, you reap the rewards, and the rewards here are quite sweet. So all in all, this is quite a month. There's one other thing I want to touch base on really quickly, and I want to go back to the eclipse, because this is such a unique thing to be able to see this in this way. And here we are on the day of the eclipse. Aspects come from the 12-fold nature of the signs of the zodiac. We take a circle and we divide it in half. That's an opposition. You see, there are 12 signs in the zodiac, and 12 divides by 2, but divides in half. That's 6 signs apart. It divides by 3. Those are trines. That's 4 signs apart. It divides by 4. Those are squares. That's 3 signs apart. It divides also by 6, and that would be a sextile, or 1/6 of a circle, and that's 2 signs apart. Now, the thing is that in astrology, the magic here, the interesting thing is that we forget that we think that there are 12 signs up there, but there aren't. There are 12 signs in here. And we can divide the circle, the cycle, up into any number of sectors that we want. But even if we divide it by 5, that's complicated because there's 72 degrees between each point in that circle, and that doesn't fit by signs. It's non-zodiacal. So it becomes an aspect that many astrologers do not use. However, we can also take that circle, and let's see if I can do this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Close enough. There's a 7-pointed star. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And this 7-pointed star is also a sacred geometrical configuration, but it's not used by most astrologers because they're complicated. They don't come out even. You can't even divide 7 into 360. It comes out to 51.27. It's a number that's non-decimal. It doesn't work. My research and other astrologers who do use the division by 7, called the septile, septiles are complicated. They're otherworldly. They're alien. They're alien ghosts, goblins, spirit guides, ancestor guides, things that go bump in the night, poltergeists. They're Dane Rudhyar, the great American humanistic astrologer of the 20th century, called septiles the aspect of fate. Why fate? Because things are moving around in parallel universes and other dimensions, and then they come crashing through. The World Trade Tower bombing on September 11th, 2001 was a heavily septile chart. People like Michael Jackson, like David Bowie, are examples of people with heavily septile charts. They're otherworldly. They're complicated. Now, why is this important? Very simply, the eclipse coming up, if we switch the lens on our microscope, or maybe that should be on our macroscope, if we switch our lens so that we only see the septiles. And when I say septiles, I mean that seven-pointed star, the 1/7, 2/7, or 3/7, the septiles, biseptiles, or triseptiles. If we switch our lens and look at this through that filter, we come up with another whole different pattern of things. Let's in fact add the moon, and let's add, there we go, back into it. And we have a chart that is very heavily resonant to the septiles. And again, the thing here to note is that these septiles involve Jupiter and Venus and Uranus. We have Jupiter and Uranus involved, kind of holding everything else together with 1, 2, 3 planets on a seven-pointed star. In fact, we could add another point here and here and here and here, and that would come up with that seven-pointed star. I don't want to dig too deeply here. I just want to note, and the other thing is that the eclipse itself, the Sun-Moon conjunction, is 1/7 of a circle to Saturn. So something real, Saturn, I believe, is going to come crashing through. This eclipse is important because it's in Aquarius and we're moving from Aquarius to Pisces. It's important because Mercury is involved in it and its communication. And again, Mercury's connection to Uranus is the lower and higher octave. But it's also important because of all these and also because Mars is squaring Neptune, which kind of gives it this whole sense of other reality, and we don't quite know what's going on. And now we add to this being one of the most densely septiled charts that I've seen, and this eclipse is packing a punch. I don't know what it'll bring. I just know it'll be unexpected and powerful, and it may in fact be something that is quite, as to use Dane Rudhyar's word, fateful. So where does that leave us? It leaves us facing a month ahead that is full of uncertainty. It's an eclipse, and it's all that Piscean energy where we have to move ourselves into a higher level. The danger here is spiritual bypassing. It's like just saying, it's all okay, I'm in a spiritual place. It's not all okay. Things occur on multiple levels. We're going from a place of Aquarian knowingness to a place of Neptunian uncertainty, and yet we also have the opportunity to focus on our dreams and to make our dreams come true, but we do not want to mix up our illusions and our dreams with reality. However, it is those dreams that and illusions that we want to focus on to make them become real. Some of you have heard me say before, William Blake wrote, "What is now proved was once only imagined." There's a sense, my friend Caroline Casey says that imagination lays the tracks for the reality train to follow. So it's in this Neptunian uncertainty, the dream world, where we actually get to begin to build the Saturnian scaffolding to create the reality that we want. But we have to be careful not to just assume that the dream is real. There's work to do, and we're all in this together. I am you as you are me, as we are all together. Goo goo gajoob. See you next month when I'm back, hopefully safe and sound from my ventures to India. Peace out.